All right, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is having an excellent policy orientation. I know that this one has been especially interesting, and there's actually been some very exciting panels going on. It's probably one of my favorite policy orientation events so far. Speaking of interesting and exciting panels, we have a very spirited discussion set to begin on local control and local liberty. But before we get there, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm James Quintero. I'm the director of the Center for Local Governance. Thank you. Together with my colleague Allegra Hill, there in the back. Raise your hand, Allegra. We help advance conservative change at the local level. And we do that with cities, counties, school districts, and special districts. And although we are only about 2 years old, I would say we've had a good amount of success. I think there's a lot of reform that still needs to be done, but it's exciting to see conservatives engage at the local level. Now, one of the challenges that I've come to observe is that effecting change is somewhat difficult in Texas because of the concept or the perhaps the misuse or misapplication of local control to sometimes justify bad policy. Now, a great example of this happened during the last legislative session. What you saw was a movement by members of the Texas legislature to rein in the growth of property taxes, doing so by limiting the amount of property tax revenue that a city or a county could collect from one year to the next. Now, in response to this policy proposal, what you saw was almost a rebellion among your big city mayors. They formed a group by the name of the M10, and they effectively made the argument that local control was more important than property tax reform because communities needed to be able to dictate the amount of property tax revenue that was coming in. A very interesting discussion, very interesting debate that happened. Ultimately, conservatives were not successful, but I think we have some good momentum heading into the next session on property tax reform. All of which begs a few particular questions. What comes to mind is at what point does local control become local tyranny? And does the legislature have a responsibility to rein in those excesses? Now, to help me answer some of those questions, I've got a very good and qualified panel here of experts, very good policy professionals. And our first panelist is Senator Bob Hall, who is ranked at the top of all legitimate Texas conservative organizations, including Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Texas Right to Life, Eagle Forum, Concerned Women for America of Texas. He graduated from the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, with a degree in electrical engineering and received a regular commission as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. And after watching him perform in the last legislative session, I can say he is definitely one of my favorite legislators. Please help me welcome Senator Bob Hall.
Wow, thank you for that compliment coming from TPBF. Let's appreciate that. I'll just reconfirm what he says is someone who is an original intent constitutional conservative who unabashedly views things through the lens of Judeo-Christian values. I find this topic to be a very interesting one because limited government was intended for a purpose, and that was to allow us the liberties and freedom and a free enterprise system for economic prosperity for everyone. And what we find is as our governments have grown at all levels, it has consumed finances and liberties and limited the free enterprise system to the point that we are not far from choking our system. where we look at constantly a 2% growth in an economy, and we look at why that is, we can find that the root cause or limiting of that is government regulations. Government regulations that inhibit competition, that are a burden to businesses, whether they're large or small. And I'm talking about regulations and laws not only because, as I understand it, we're talking about liberty versus control, local control, and understanding that when we talk about control, we have to understand that the foundation of our country is the state. It's not the federal government, it's the state. It's first the people, or in my view, it's first God and then the people that form the states, and it was the states that formed the federal government, and it's the state that formed our local governments, the cities and the counties, so that state control is local control from a national standpoint. And it was done that way for a very good reason, because if you don't have at least some consistency at the state level, you have absolute, utter chaos within the state. And you imagine what it would be. There got to be limits and lines drawn. I understand that the government can never, ever keep doing what it can't keep doing the idea of one size fits all. That's understandable. But we have to look at what is truly local and what is statewide. And you imagine if all the cities were allowed to, let's say, establish their own rules for voting, they're allowed to establish their own rules for traffic management. I'm not sure everybody here remembers back as far as I do when we didn't know we could turn right on red depending on what city we're in. Well, we're now getting the same thing. You don't know whether you can use your cell phone in the car, depending on what city you're in. If you live in the Dallas area, it's a hodgepodge as you move from one to the other. And so as we see our cities and other municipalities that have the authority under the way we're set up today to issue rules and regulations, we can see that it not necessarily in the best interest of everyone in the state. When we take a look at some of the things that come about, such as bag bans, which has been shown over and over again that is very, very unhealthy for people and has absolutely no environmental benefit to it, yet it has caused a great deal of grief for people and further restrictions. We have the issues of, as technology has changed, we have Uber, which has brought a whole new dimension from getting from one place to the other within a city. And people come up and say, well, they need to operate to the same regulations. And I say, yeah, that's right. Everybody needs to operate to the same regulations. Let's get rid of some of those that we have the taxi cabs operating under now and let them operate in a free enterprise system. I say, but what about background checks? Folks, if you look at the record, there are more taxi cab drivers assaulted by passengers than passengers assaulted by taxi cab drivers. Let's require a background check for a passenger before they get into a vehicle. You know, some of these things just absolutely don't make sense. And then when you have rules that are created at a local level that have a statewide impact and impact property rights, you have a system that's running kind of out of control. Take the fracking ban in Denton, where a group of people wanted to take away the property rights of people with no compensation. That was and this was what they were doing. Not to mention the economic impact it had by billions of dollars of restricting one of the natural resources that Texas has been blessed with. So we have to look very carefully at what authorities governments have at any level to limit our liberties and our freedoms, because they have huge impacts. that are the unintended consequences of many of the do-gooders and special interest groups. As an example, with the taxi cabs, you take a look at the rules and regulations around them, and they're specifically designed to limit competition. So as we move forward in this, what we need to be looking at is what are the benefits, and make sure that we look at what the unintended consequences are of excessive regulations or regulations in general, because the downside of many of these is far more detrimental than the perceived or published benefit. So I'm one who comes down very strong on the side of smaller government, and when it comes to items like the property taxes, I've said this for a long time, at no level in Texas do we have a revenue problem. What we do is we have a spending problem. We spend too much on too many things that government actually has no business spending money on, being involved in, involved in causing businesses to have to spend money or to run their businesses with dictating how they can rent their apartments or their houses, how they can expand their business and how they can operate it. That's not the government's job. The government's job is to protect the people. That's the government's job. All of these other things that government has decided to get its finger stuck into has nothing to do with protecting the people or protecting our liberties and freedoms. It has nothing to do with growing the economy. The government is there to make sure that we're protected from enemies from abroad and from bad people internally, and that we take care of those that would do harm to others. And let the free enterprise system work with people engaging in business so that they can grow their businesses. So I will come down very strongly on the side of liberty and freedom as opposed to control, whether it be at the local level or at the state, that does not relate directly to the protection of the people. Thank you.
Excellent thought, Senator. Our next panelist is a good sparring partner of mine, and although we don't always see eye to eye, I would say that Luke has proven himself more than capable in the policy arena, very knowledgeable on the issues. Luke Metzger is the founding director of Environment Texas. He regularly testifies before the Texas legislature and appears frequently in the media. His essay, Polluting the Brazos, Sullying the Soul of Texas, was chosen for publication in the college textbook, The Longwood Guide to Writing. If you would, please help me welcome Luke Metzger.
Thank you, James. I think the bottom line is that there has to be a balance between local control and liberty. And obviously I work on environmental issues, and so I look at it from the lens of the environment. And I think there are a number of examples of how we do need some reasonable standards to protect people's property. I'm reminded of the old expression that your right to throw your fist ends when it touches the tip of my nose. What you do on your property can impact other people's property, and that's where local government and government in general plays a critical role in helping balance that out, helping protect basic health and safety. And I think two good examples of that are on, as have been mentioned, around plastic pollution and on fracking. Now, if you look at plastic bags, we think that nothing we use for just a few minutes should pollute our state and our oceans for hundreds of years. But that's what plastic bags are doing. They are, every year, millions of them wind up in our parks, in our creeks, in trees, in the Gulf of Mexico, where they not only make Texas less beautiful, but cause some serious problems. We know that it costs a lot of money to clean up litter. TxDOT spent $47 million in 2012 cleaning up roadside litter, including plastic bags. Harris County spent $11 million last year on street sweeping and litter abatement, and these things cost money. We also know that plastic bags can cause risks to public safety, including flooding by clogging creeks and storm drains. We know that plastic bags are causing problems for the Gulf of Mexico, where they wind up on beaches, which can hurt tourism dollars for local communities that have beaches littered with bags. Nobody wants to go to a beach like that. And they also cause harm to marine wildlife. For example, sea turtles can mistake plastic bags for jellyfish and end up choking and dying on those bags. So unfortunately, the state of Texas is not taking action to address this problem, to help protect our communities and wildlife from the threats of plastic bags. And that's why local governments have stepped in to fill the void, to help protect our communities, help clean them up, to help keep Texas beautiful. About 11 cities in Texas now have passed ordinances on plastic bags, ranging from Brownsville all the way out to Fort Stockton in West Texas. And these programs are working. Just here in Austin, the ordinance has reduced plastic bag litter by 2 to 6 million bags every year. And just look around and you can see the difference between before the ordinance and today. Our city is much more beautiful, far less litter from plastic bags. And this is litter that is highly visible, it floats, it can wind up in our trees, and it really has kind of a special problem associated with it compared to other forms of litter. We also, I think fracking is another example of how what you do on your property impacts other people's property and other people's health. And a good example of that is the experience of Robert and Lisa Parr in Decatur, Texas. They own a 40-acre cattle ranch about 40 miles northwest of Fort Worth. And around 2008, they lived there with their 11-year-old daughter, Emma. And around 2008, when the fracking boom really started taking off, oil and gas companies developed 20 different wells around their property. And it was at that time that Lisa Parr started to get sick. She started to have pounding headaches and get sick to her stomach. She just developed a mysterious rash on her body and open sores that wouldn't close. Once she had to go to the emergency room and doctors had to pack her body in ice. Her daughter, then in the first grade, started to have serious nosebleeds. She'd wake up in the middle of the night soaked in blood. And her husband, Robert, started to have memory loss. They went to the doctors, and 8 different doctors, and the doctors couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Then their calves on their ranch started having birth defects, and pets died. They started to hear similar complaints from neighbors. So they finally got the air tested and found a number of toxic chemicals associated with petroleum products like benzene thick in the air. Lisa had her blood tested. They found 20 different chemicals in her blood. Her doctor told her, get out of there. It's not safe to be in your home. And so they had to move out of their own home for several months. They rightly sued to hold the company accountable, and a jury found last year that the company had polluted their property and had made them sick. And that's just one example that we're hearing dozens and hundreds of stories like this across Texas of people whose health, whose property has been damaged by other people's activities from fracking. And these examples are backed up by science. The University of Colorado School of Public Health found that people living within 1 mile of a fracking facility were at greater risk of health problems. Researchers at UT Arlington last year found more than 19 fracking-related chemicals in drinking water wells across North Texas. And it's not just threats to health, it's also threats to safety. Last spring, a gas well in Arlington leaked fracking fluid, and it had forced people from 50 homes to evacuate their homes. We also know people in the North Texas towns of Azle and Reno have had their homes rattled dozens of times by earthquakes that scientists link to the injection of wastewater deep underground. The town of Barnhart in West Texas, their drinking water wells went dry. They ran out of water because of drilling companies withdrawing water for fracking. The town of Flower Mound found property values of homes in their community dropped because of drilling nearby. And we know then with all these problems, once again, the state of Texas has failed to protect people from those problems. And for example, the Railroad Commission, which is the state agency which regulates oil and gas in the state of Texas, has a terrible track record of inspecting these facilities and holding companies accountable when they break the law. The Sunset Commission, which of course is the agency which reviews other state agencies, they looked at the enforcement program of the Railroad Commission and they called it, quote, sorely lacking. And it's no wonder when you look at the millions of dollars that oil and gas companies are giving in campaign contributions to the commissioners of the Railroad Commission and to members of the legislature. The Sunset Commission called those donations a clear conflict of interest. So clearly, again, local governments are stepping up to fill the void to protect people from these threats. And they're doing reasonable measures like a buffer zone to say you can't drill right next to an elementary school. You can't drill right in the middle of a city park. We're going to have our own city staff go and inspect these facilities to make sure they're safe. And we're doing it far more frequently than the once every few years that the state get around to doing it. So we know that cities are playing a critical role in protecting, or they were playing a critical role in protecting people and really are often the last line of defense. But the legislature last session passed HB 40 expressly preempting the rights of cities to adopt some of these very basic protections. And I think that's a huge mistake. The great thing about cities and about our kind of federal system of government is that a city is smaller, it's much more nimble than the state legislature to be able to respond to local constituents and the problems they bring to them. And they're able to develop novel policies and test them out. And if they work and they're successful, great, then other cities can adopt them too. And maybe the state will take them on and make it a statewide policy. And if the policy fails, then the rest of the state won't have had gone through it. But if we have state preemption really blocking the creativity of local problem solvers, that's a huge loss. And it really is an attack on the marketplace of ideas that we find in local governments. So in conclusion, I think there has to be a balance. We need to protect local liberty, of course, but we also, sometimes liberty infringes on somebody else's liberty, and we have to have that balance. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you. Our next panelist is a strong voice for liberty in the Texas House, and also another favorite of mine to watch in action. Representative Rinaldi was elected to House District 115 in 2014 to represent the northwest portion of Dallas County. Representative Rinaldi sits on both the Committee on Business and Industry and the Committee on Agriculture and Livestock. He is currently a commercial litigation attorney and a strong advocate of tort reform in the legal community. Please help me welcome Representative Matt Rinaldi.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk today about how we work all of these concepts we've been talking about into a workable principle of governance. When we see a bill, we evaluate a bill that arguably impacts on local control. How do we evaluate that bill and the balance between liberty and local control? A very important issue, the infamous Governor Abbott quote, which he was exactly right in saying Texas is being Californianized, and you may not even be noticing it, by bills that impact us on a local level. Bag bans, he said, fracking bans, tree cutting bans. We're forming a patchwork quilt of bans and rules and regulations that's eroding the Texas model. I think that's absolutely right. So the question we usually get is, isn't this hypocritical? Because we're for states' rights as conservatives, but when it comes to local control, sometimes we want the state to intervene. And I don't think it does. First of all, I've always found it hypocritical that local control advocates always seem to abandon it when it doesn't suit their political purposes. For example, the texting while driving debate I always think of. Why do the loudest advocates of local control, when a texting while driving bill comes up, want to preempt local choices not to impose fines for texting while driving? I mean, there are many other examples as well, but it seems to be sometimes we don't have a working principle of governance, and instead it's just, well, if I like the policy, I'm going to point to local control. If I don't, I'll figure out some other principle to point to. And that's not the way we should be looking at these issues. In reality, any law that we pass that has statewide applicability infringes on local control. So that can't be a trump card. It can't be the absolute principle of governance that we can point to at any point in time. It's a good guideline, but it's not absolute. It's not a trump card. So what I want to talk to today is, first of all, the rule of law when it comes to local control issues, which Senator Hall touched on, and the fact that local control is not an absolute principle of governance, so when is it trumped? First of all, local control has many benefits. We all acknowledge that. Many government-mandated one-size-fits-all approaches just don't work at a local level. Public education is best worked on a local level. Zoning, fire codes, many traffic regulations, all best on a local level. So, you know, what's the rule of law that tells us that on a state level, policymaking is better done in some instances? Well, first of all, it is a rule of law, as Senator Hall said. The states created the federal government and the local government. But oftentimes when you're in a policy debate, that isn't necessarily the most compelling thing. So we need to explain why. Why is that the case? I was thinking back to when I was talking to one of my colleagues in the legislature. It was late one day, and we've been working for a long time, and I was going up to the mic to talk. And my colleague mentioned to me, and he goes, "You're not going to Constitution land, are you?" And I said, "I may go to Constitution land." But I also got from him that he didn't want to talk about the constitutional arguments for an issue without the answer of why. Why is that the best principle of governance? We have the best governing document that the world has ever seen. So whenever we do make a constitutional argument, a structure of government argument, we should be able to explain why this makes people happier. And in this case, we get it from our founders' writings. Madison wrote in Federalist number 10 about the danger of factions, right? And we often learned about it in political science class, factions as lobbyists or interest groups. That's not really what he meant at the time. When he was talking about factions and interest groups in the Federalist number 10, what he was talking about was the dangers of just really amped up groups of people. And that's exactly why the state government is more immune to that pressure than local governments are. I mean, if anybody who's been to a city council meeting can see that when there's a big issue that hits the city government, as crowds of people flood in to the city council meetings, and city councils haven't seen this level of interest before. City governments are very, very influenced by amped up groups of people. And that's exactly what Madison was talking about in Federalist number 10, which is why the state government, more immune, is often best at setting those policy prescriptions. So what are the governing principles that the state government should look to when it's deciding whether to preempt local control? Well, the first, I think, is important. The first one isn't liberty. The first one is where it creates an unworkable patchwork of regulation. You know, some traffic regulations, speed limits on a particular street are best done at a local level. But when you're talking about, say, texting while driving bans, how are you to know when you move from one city or one county to the next whether or not what you're doing is illegal? Second Amendment, that implicates liberty, but it also implicates a patchwork of regulation. If I'm carrying a handgun in one city and I move to the next, am I supposed to search on the internet every single time I cross a city line? And that would arguably implicate the texting while driving ban too, so you don't want to do that. But you get my point. So the first thing I always ask is, local control implicated, yes. Would it create an unworkable patchwork of regulation? If yes, then it's a state issue and we should regulate it at the state level. The second one is, does it implicate a liberty interest? Because liberty trumps local control. And when I talk about liberty interest, I'm not talking about enumerated constitutional rights, not something you would go to court for necessarily. You know, bag bans may not infringe on fundamental constitutional rights. But if you remember in the 9th Amendment, they talk about rights retained by the people. the very never cited Ninth Amendment. But when we talk about rights retained by the people, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about these liberty interests that it's up to someone other than the judiciary or some body other than the judiciary to protect. And that's what the state government needs to be looking out for. So while bag bans may not infringe on constitutional rights that are fundamental, like freedom of speech or the right to bear arms or equal protection, they implicate contractual and private property rights that are very important and are certainly retained by the people. Examples of where a liberty interest is implicated that the state needs to evaluate. Bag bans. Bag bans erode the right to contract, and the state needs to evaluate whether or not there's a public policy justification for it. In the case of bag bans, the state has evaluated that and put statutes into place which prohibit these bans, which resulted in Dallas revoking theirs under threat of a lawsuit, or the lawsuit may have been filed, I don't remember, but it was in the early stages if it was. And why is there no public policy justification, which we've heard before? It's been found that, yes, plastic bags have, we've lowered the use of plastic bags with at least Austin's plastic bag ban, and there are less being used. But there are studies that also been found that it's worse for the environment overall because their use has been replaced by thicker bags that take more, that use a bigger carbon footprint to produce and take up more landfill space. Also subjects the consumers to health risks. Reusable bags create a higher risk of foodborne illness. Also violates the state statute, creates more shoplifting, which I had never heard before until I talked to one of the local Kroger owners. And he had said that they were having a shoplifting problem because they couldn't tell who had paid and who wouldn't because the bag was an indicator that they had paid. And also economic harm, the fact that people can't buy as much. So there are competing interests in this, and who evaluates them? The state does. The state needs to evaluate whether or not the liberty interest is implicated and outweighs the benefits. The HERO ordinance impacts this as well. Criminalizes business owners' right to do business with whom they choose. And there are other examples as well, and we can go on and on. So when you're evaluating these issues, that's how you need to look at them as to this balance. Proponents of local control, above all else, should ask, should a city be able to prohibit smoking in homes? Should a city be able to exempt itself from the state ban on abortion after 20 weeks? Should a city be able to exempt itself from the state ban on dog fighting? Is this a local control issue? If you could find one space in Texas that could do that, then you'd have a dog fighting ring in Texas, arguably. You would have little pockets where you can get an abortion after 20 weeks of late-term abortions. We don't believe that. We believe that the state needs to look at the liberty interests involved and protect liberty where it's warranted. The superiority of liberty over local control, nothing new. It's applied on a federal level in perspective with the federal government's relationship with local governments, for example. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibits local laws on a city level which violate freedom of speech, which violate Second Amendment rights. George Wallace's stand in 1963 resisting segregation of public schools. If you look at his writings at the time, he talks about local control. We don't believe, and we've never believed in the last 100 years or more, that liberty does not trump local control. So that's how we need to look at these issues on a state level. We need to say, okay, local control is a principle of governance that sometimes works. And is it unworkable due to a patchwork of regulation? Or is there a countervailing liberty interest that outweighs it? And that's how we should look at every, I believe, local control issue on a state level. Thank you.
For everyone wondering where Senator Garcia is, she's attending a funeral for a family friend, so our thoughts and prayers are with her. But that means we have a little more time for Q&A, and so what I'd like to do is actually I have a question for the panel, and I'd like to see if anybody's got a good answer. You know, we've discussed a lot kind of the merits of the plastic bag ban and whatnot, but it seems to me that, that you have a situation where various political subdivisions are effectively ignoring what the state has said on certain matters. Now, the state has, through the Attorney General, has an ability to issue an advisory opinion, but really the burden of making sure that local governments observe state law has fallen on individuals in the affected communities. Should the state have a responsibility to make sure that local governments are observing state law? Should the Attorney General office have some kind of enforcement mechanism provided to it in order to rein in some of these excesses?
I can answer if you want.
I can too. Go ahead.
Yes, I do think it should. In the case of the bag ban, I mean, you're talking about a simple declaratory judgment action. If the Attorney General's office were to enforce these bans, it wouldn't take up an unworkable amount of resources from the Attorney General's office, and oftentimes these cases would be decided on the law alone. There is an extensive discovery. So, yes, I think it is the responsibility of the state to look out where cities are violating state law in these instances and enforce state law in the courts.
Oh, I agree completely, and I think unfortunately in the past, the state has managed to pass a number of laws in which there was no recourse to enforce them. We currently have one right now that says that a lobbyist cannot hold an elected office. But for years we have had a lobbyist in elected office. It looks like that's coming to an end this time, but he stayed in office because there was no recourse. Yes, everybody agreed. The Attorney General agreed, the Governor agreed, the legislature agreed that, yes, there was a violation of the law, but there was no recourse to it. And so I think it's incumbent upon the legislature in the future to make sure that as we have these laws that there is a recourse and that there is action taken for that, to enforce that law. And if the people decide that it's a law they don't like, then that's when we get it changed. But if we have a law in the books, it needs to be enforced.
It sounds to me, James, that you're proposing a pretty big expansion of power and of state governments there, and that's going to cost more money, and so I'm curious where you're going with this. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think the courts are pretty set up well to address any of these kind of conflicts. I think just to address your point about plastic bag bans specifically, the Attorney General opinion found that it suggests that a ordinance would be in conflict with state law if they only adopted it for solid waste management purposes. If they had other reasons for adopting it, including litter control, keeping their parks clean, all those kinds of ordinances appear under his opinion to stand up.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be an expansion of state government. For example, in the example that Senator Hall used in terms of enforcing when somebody's serving in office illegally, the Attorney General already has exclusive jurisdiction to remove someone from office in an action that's called a quo warranto action. So he already has that power. It's not an expansion of government. Regarding the AG opinion, you are correct if it's a ban. If it's adopted for solid waste management purposes, which would arguably include bags in a park, solid waste, managing it. But in regards to a tax or a surcharge like Dallas, there isn't that qualifier in the law. So any tax or surcharge is going to be illegal regardless of the purpose. But the thing is, most of the cities that have enacted it have admitted in many public statements that it's for solid waste management purposes.
Well, just to kind of expand, since we brought up the bag ban, that's kind of a popular thing to talk about here. It's typical of of trying to go after the symptom instead of solving the problem. The problem of littering, we already have laws on the books. So one more law is not the answer to solving a law that's not already being enforced. And the other, to talk about banning an activity when it's not the activity itself, but the results of it. In a time with the bags when they used to be non-biodegradable, they last for an awful long time. That's different than today, which I think most of the plastic bags out there, at least the mess I found in my garage from some I had that were just a year and a half old, disintegrated and weren't even in the sunlight. It's more of the results of an activity. The fracking is a good example. Instead of addressing the issue of the problem, if there was one really, and real science was used to determine a health issue, then the problem should be addressed from a standpoint of the health issue, not the activity. Just to have the ham-fisted response that says, well, you can't do that. Well, it's not doing that that's the problem. It's maybe the way it's being done. And so we need to be more careful at looking at the way we implement rules so that we solve the problem, don't just create a law that goes after the symptom.
Can I respond? Yeah. But Senator, at least HB 40 goes far beyond that. It doesn't just say you can't, prohibits cities from saying you can't do that. It says it expressly preempts city ordinances from regulating like how you do it, like buffer zones, saying you can't drill near a home or near schools or in parks. That preemption went far beyond what you're saying, including and sweeping up in it many reasonable things that I think most people would agree are proper protections for especially vulnerable populations like children or nursing home residents or other people like that.
All right, now that I've sufficiently stirred them up, I want to ask if anybody in the audience has a question. Mr. Don Dixon? There's a mic coming right there.
Thank you, panel. Very good discussion. I certainly enjoy that. From a business standpoint, from a businessman's standpoint, when I hear the word local control, I see it, they use it very liberally. Uh-oh, they're coming after my liberty, or they're going to raise my taxes. So I get very nervous when I hear that word because they use that to overstep their bounds. Local government. In part and parcel, these local governments have the authority to tax. And whenever they use that tax money to hire lobbyists to promote those very things that I don't want, I think that's the wrong use of our money. So have any of you all studied this in also conjunction with the local control issue?
Panel, have any of you looked at the issue of taxpayer-funded lobbyists and how they're used to influence the trajectory of all of this?
Yes, I was co-author of a bill that would ban taxpayer-funded lobbying.
I agree with it. I mean, think about that, folks, using your tax money to go try to convince the legislature to spend more of your tax money on a special interest group. And believe me, local government is a special interest group, as are the local school districts, and I just don't think that's a proper use of tax money to try to convince the legislature, other places, to spend more of your money on something that serves a very narrow group of people.
Any other questions? We got one. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, I applaud the intervention by the state to protect property rights in terms of any local local initiative that interferes with someone's property rights. But I'm curious as to why in that bill, I think I'm correct about it, that they let the decision of whether it actually affects somebody's property rights with the county clerk, as opposed to making that go through a legal process with a court system? Doesn't that give the county clerk the ability to just disregard things, saying, well, this doesn't have anything to do with your property rights, we're going to go ahead and implement our municipal plan regardless, because property rights aren't involved?
Had to leave a little bit of local control. So, no, I can't, I really don't know why they particularly, I don't recall why they would pick the county clerk on that.
I believe we have a question up here up front.
Mr. Metzger, you were talking about the many wonderful benefits of bag bans. And one of them you mentioned was the elimination or reduction of the cost to clean up roads, the cost to clean up roads. So Austin has had a bag ban in place for years now. How much has the budget been able to cut the cost of cleaning roads in Austin as a result of having a bag ban?
It's a good question. I don't know.
That it's zero or
Posit
less.
or you know?
I would posit.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. We should look that in. Certainly, plastic bags aren't the only form of litter, and we have, and one good thing I would like to.
If you're saying it would reduce costs, I would argue that you should be able to defend that it has reduced costs.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll look into that.
Yes, ma'am.
Regarding our property rights, what would it take to get HUD under control?
Well, you can elect Ted Cruz as president.
Yes, elect Ted Cruz as president. That'll be the first good step. Not only HUD, but the IRS and the EPA will be right in that same basket.
We have a question over. Well, panel, we're going to end a little early, but we got one more over here. Oh,
Okay.
go ahead, Phil.
A question for the three panelists. So we're talking local control, not application of regulation. We're talking here about where is the most appropriate level. Should regulation for certain things be done at the local level or the state level? If Environment Texas is taking a position at that they think local control is the right level, are you saying the state shouldn't be regulated? There should not be a state ban anywhere? It should only be done at local levels? Or is your position that any level it can be regulated at is what you're looking for? Are you abandoning state regulation? Because I think when you look at the state law, it doesn't eliminate the fact that you could propose something at the state level. They're just saying it's not the local level. They're saying for uniformity. So what is the real position? Are you taking a appropriate level, or I'm a little bit lost on this?
Well, I think there's an appropriate level for, I think there were some examples that were given. I think zoning is a local issue, that certain parts of traffic decisions would be a local level. Stop signs and traffic lights and speed limits. There are other parts of that I think, that need to be consistent throughout the state. I mean, the city shouldn't be able to come up with their own way of striping the roads or decide you can drive on the left-hand side or things of that nature. Those things that carry us from, because we're a very mobile area. I mean, it's not, people don't live in the city and never go anywhere anymore. We're very mobile. So there are things that you need to have consistency from one area to the other as you go, but there are other things that happen locally. The size of the school building and where it's located. I question the sanity of some of the school districts and how much money the people allow them to spend on the mausoleums that they build, but that's their decision to make. That's not one that necessarily should be at the state level.
Certain stuff should be determined at the state level, whether it's passed or not. It should always remain in that realm, but then there's certain ones at local levels that should always remain at that realm, and we shouldn't be floating back and forth depending on the time.
I think the answer is yes to that. But one thing specific is that if the state addresses the issue with the law, then that takes it out of the hands of the local to, as an example with open carry that was just passed. No local entity should even, should have the authority to say, yeah, but you're not going to open carry in this city. That kind of thing, if it's addressed at the state level, then it should be, that's where it's addressed.
Our bottom line is protecting the environment. We don't care which level of government does it. We want, our air to be safe to breathe. We want our parks protected. And, there is, you've said before that local control advocates, only use it when it's helpful to them. And I would say the same is probably true for you. I mean, you said that when there's a conflict, liberty always trumps local control. What about somebody who wants to build a porn store or a strip club right next to a church? Is that not an appropriate, limitation on their liberty because the community decides that's not within their values? There are times when we do legitimately have some limits on someone's liberty or their ability to develop their property because of things that protect the community. And I'm arguing that that's the case we need to do in terms of health and protecting the environment. And I'm sure everyone can come up with their own examples. And you've said that the same thing with the driving on the left side of the road. That's about saving lives and protecting people. Why shouldn't we have a community be able to do that on issues like fracking?
I'd say just remind you, there's a big difference. Now, we said zoning is a local issue. So building a porn store next to a school would be a zoning issue locally. But stopping someone from building that kind of a place next to a school is somewhat different than prohibiting someone to get their property value, which is the minerals that are within it. Because you didn't build that particular kind of store doesn't mean you couldn't put a grocery store in there or a dime store or something else. It's not prohibiting the use of the property. So it's not really a one-for-one liberty issue.
Well, I think the important thing, and you bring up a good point, and this might be a good thing to conclude on also, there is some degree of subjectivity in what exactly constitutes a liberty issue and when it outweighs the local control issue. But the point is we should at least be having the debate in those terms rather than just randomly screaming local control like it's a trump card and then on another issue just being quiet. We should at least have the debate in that term. And I think that adds to the whole process and it adds to the discussion if we can do that at least.
And by the way, I've been around the legislature for a little while now. This is the first time that I can ever remember local liberty, this conversation about local liberty ever taking place. So I think, we as conservatives are moving the conversation in the right direction. It's just how we advance it further. Questions? Well, with that, folks, let me thank the panel for their time today, and also let you know that this conversation is going to continue online. Texas Public Policy Foundation just launched its local government website called thinklocalliberty.com. We'll be posting a lot of this local liberty stuff online, so I encourage you to visit it, like it on Facebook. Please help me thank the panel